Danger at Diablo, Chapter 8. New Friends. Annie was up at sunrise. This day would be a busy one. They had to unload the wagon and settle the few pieces of furniture they had brought with them across country. She tiptoed to the kitchen, hoping she wouldn't awaken either Uncle Luke or Tag. There stood the new wood stove that Uncle Luke had written about. It was the very latest word in luxury, with its solid black top, polished till it shone. There were 4 big cooking holes, each covered with an iron lid, and the word "Home" glowed at her in shining metal letters from the oven door. But, most wonderful of all, there was a deep well at one side of the Iron Beauty, filled with water that would get hot as the stove warmed up. Uncle Luke had a neat pile of firewood beside the stove, and had laid a fire that needed only one of the sulphur matches from the iron-stone match holder above the stove to set it blazing. Across the big room, the open fireplace looked deserted and forlorn. A 3-legged, soot-blackened kettle hung on its hook over the clean-swept hearth, and there was thick dust on the old leather billows that leaned dejectedly against the brick frame. She thought of the hundreds of good hearty meals that had been cooked in that big old fireplace, long before there was a stove in the territory. Now it was good only for extra use when the handsome new iron stove was too crowded. She soon had the big coffee pot steaming and a tall stack of flapjacks keeping warm on the back of the stove. Uncle Luke poked a smiling face through the doorway from the hall. "I heard something going on," he chuckled, "but I figured it was mice." Annie waved a big iron mixing spoon. "It better not be in my kitchen." He sniffed the air with approval. "Something smells like real coffee." He poked an exploratory finger into the top flapjack. "Real gentle-like critters," he decided. "They don't snap back like mine do." Annie laughed and filled his plate. "Did you hear Tag stirring in there, Uncle Luke?" "Not a sound. Guess the little feller's still tired. We better let him sleep till—" A high-pitched yell came from somewhere outside. "Hey, Annie! Come and look!" Annie dropped the spoon and ran to the back door. Tag, in his nightclothes, was galloping a handsome black and white pony across the rear yard. When he reached the far end, he wheeled it and came dashing back. "Well, I'll be jiggered." Uncle Luke slapped his thigh and chuckled. Tag pulled up with a flourish at the back door. "I found my pony! In the barn!" he shouted at Annie. "Isn't he a beaut?" "I'll pony you, young man, if you don't get in here this minute and put your clothes on." Tag knew that tone of voice. He dismounted hastily, but stood with his arm around the pony's neck. "He is the one you promised me, isn't he, Uncle Luke?" The big man laughed. "He sure is, Tag. He's been waiting quite a while for you." Tag laid his cheek against the pony's soft neck. "I just love him," he said solemnly. "And thanks, Uncle Luke. Thanks a whole lot." "Now take him back to the barn." Annie tried to keep her voice stern. "And then you hike right back here and get ready for your breakfast." When he was out of hearing, she laughed. "He's been talking about that pony for 2 months. I guess he just couldn't wait." "I never figured he'd be up at the crack of dawn, or I'd have been right there in the barn to introduce the 2 of them," he chuckled. She grinned in return. It looks like they tended to that themselves." The ranch was small, but there was everything on it that a curious small boy and an adventure-loving girl could ask for. While Luke McTavish and Lofty Craig were trying, with no success, to trace the escaped prisoner and his rescuer, Annie and Tag had a wonderful time exploring the far corners of the ranch. Luke had only a few range cattle and 1 milk cow, so there was little outside work to do, and they had a lot of time on their hands. Tag added some rare items to his collection of odds and ends. Annie was willing to let him keep most of his newfound treasures, but things like dead scorpions had a way of disappearing out of his room without much delay. He didn't mind. There were plenty more. They were resting on the top step of the shady front porch one afternoon later in the week. Annie's horse, Target, and the pony, which Tag had promptly named Pixie, were dozing under the big tree beside the well, saddled and waiting for their last canter of the day. Annie looked with a critical eye at the discarded snakeskin that was Tag's latest find. "You have 3 of those things now." She wrinkled her nose and carefully avoided touching it. "I should think that would be almost enough for anybody." "But I want to send one back to Aunt Martha and Cousin Emily and—" He ticked them off on his fingers. "I can just see their faces when they open the package," Annie laughed. Tag looked reproachful, but his attention was switched suddenly to a buckboard coming along the ranch road. He jumped up and shaded his eyes. "It's that Mr. Shanley we met in Diablo, and there's a dressed-up lady with him." He squinted. "Golly, I bet that's his daughter he was telling you about." Annie rose quickly and brushed the dust off her riding skirt and jacket. She was excited and happy at the idea of meeting a girl somewhere near her own age. Tag was a darling, of course, but after all, he was just a little boy. She hoped Edith Shanley would like to ride and hike. She had made a few friends back in the Middle West in public school, but she had been sort of tied down taking care of Tag, and they had never become close pals. But with Mr. Shanley and Uncle Luke so friendly, maybe she and Edith would hit it off the same way. In the front seat of the shiny buckboard with its fringed top, John Shanley was speaking a last word of caution to his daughter. "Get a smile on your face, miss," he said sharply. "I want her to like you." Edith Shanley's brown eyes smoldered. She turned her pretty, delicately molded face towards her father. "How is this?" she asked, twisting her cupid bow's lips into an artificial smirk. John Shanley scowled and glanced quickly toward the two figures on the distant porch. "Listen to me," he said quickly. "I dislike all of this as much as you do, but it has to be done. Let me remind you that unless I can get legal title to this ranch before fall, I'm going to prison, and you know what that will do to you." Edith's eyes flashed. "How you ever got yourself into such a stupid position?" She left the rest unsaid because they were close to the house now, and Annie was coming down the steps to meet them, with Tag close behind her. John Shanley pulled in at the high stepping horses and waved his carriage whip in greeting. "Hello there," he called genially, and under his breath he told Edith, "Now remember." Tag stood back bashfully as Shanley helped his daughter down and introduced the two girls. They were a striking contrast. Edith was a tiny thing, half a head shorter than Annie, and her fashionable silk dress, puffed and frilled and trimmed with yards of delicate lace, was almost the shade of her reddish-brown hair. Her tiny hat perched on a mass of curls, and a feather plume swept stylishly down beside her pink and white cheek. She gave a lace-gloved hand to Annie, who took it in a firm, friendly clasp. "Papa has been telling me how brave you were, making this long, hard journey all by yourself." She smiled up into Annie's honest blue eyes. "I was along," Tag explained. His freckled face was very serious. You certainly were, Button." Annie pulled him over and hugged him as she introduced him to Edith. "Well, no wonder you weren't afraid." Edith giggled and showed her dimples. Then and there, Tag decided that Miss Shanley was not only the prettiest, but the nicest young lady he had ever met. Next to Annie, of course. They all moved up onto the porch, where Annie made the Shanleys comfortable and brought them refreshingly cool water from the old well. Edith was a pretty picture in her fashionable outfit, and Annie admired it without envy. Her one Sunday dress had long since been outgrown, and she had never thought of replacing it. There were too many other uses for what little money she and Tag had. "Well, my dear," Shanley smiled fondly at his daughter, "I think we'll be starting home as soon as you tell Miss Oakley one of the reasons we came this afternoon." "Of course, Papa." Edith was sweetly affectionate little daughter. She had been chattering on about her friends and her school and her plans for the fall. Annie and Tag had seemed to be very much impressed. "It's a party," she confided prettily. "A lawn party Friday at our house. There'll be Japanese lanterns and ice cream. And, all sorts of surprises. I'd love to have you come." "I've already talked to your uncle," Shanley explained genially, "and he agrees that it'd be a good chance for you to meet all the substantial Diablo folks at one time. Sort of a welcome party for you." "Why, thank you. That would be lovely." Edith was on her feet, opening her tiny lace-trimmed parasol for the short walk to the buckboard. "We'll have a wonderful time," she told Annie. Then she noticed Tag's long face. "Oh, and we'll need somebody to help make the ice cream, won't we, Papa?" "Why not?" Shanley winked at Annie. "A strong boy to turn the handle on the freezer." "Can I, Annie? Please?" Tag looked as if his whole future hung on the answer. Annie nodded. Tag whooped and dashed down the steps to stand on his head. Edith's gay little laugh tinkled, and Tag was so happy that he ran over to Pixie and made a fast mount. John Shanley helped Edith into the buckboard and started around to the other side. He was pleased with how well everything seemed to have gone, and pleased with Edith for playing up to both the Oakleys. Over beside the well, Tag gathered Pixie's reins and wheeled him toward the buckboard. With a sudden unearthly screech that was his own version of an Indian war whoop, he dug his heels into the little pony's flanks and took off at a gallop straight across in front of Shanley's high-stepping carriage horses. One of them reared violently, and there was the sound of a snapping rein. Edith screamed. Now both horses took fright, rearing and plunging, and before John Shanley could get around to the driver's seat to grab the flying reins, the animals had started to run. Edith shrieked again and tumbled off the seat to the floor in a confusion of lace ruffles, curls, and feathers as the team broke into a runaway gallop.